Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into the medieval bedchamber for an episode your history teacher probably skipped. That's right. Why did medieval kings have sex in public? Not just a little PDA, full royal exposure, right there between the goblets and the goats. So before you cozy up, do me a favor, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what century you'd least want to accidentally attend a royal consummation in. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, switch on your fan, double lock the door, just in case some wandering baron tries to consummate a treaty in your living room, and get comfortable. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what royal intimacy actually looked like when privacy was just a rumor? Did medieval kings really have audiences for everything, including the wedding night? Did peasants get invited? Or was it a bring-your-own-torch event? How did the queen feel about this arrangement? Was she as excited as a medieval mattress, or just bracing for a round of awkward applause? Was it about fertility, politics, or just showing off your royal assets? Did anyone ever bring snacks? Did royal children have to cover their eyes? Or did they just invent trauma before therapy was a thing? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1324. You're the newly crowned king. Your hair is suspiciously damp. Your crown's on crooked. And a crowd of semi-bored nobles is standing by, waiting to watch you make history. Literally, it's your wedding night. Instead of rose petals and candlelight, you get 50 courtiers, 3 bishops, a lady with a suspiciously large candle, and a jester who's not sure where to look. In medieval Europe, the royal honeymoon suite had a door, but no one seemed to know how to use it. The atmosphere is less romance, more high-stakes talent show. The chamber is thick with incense, nervous laughter, and a gentle clatter of armor as the knight, standing guard, tries not to make eye contact with your bare feet. Privacy? Not a chance. Your nuptial chamber has been transformed into the worst open-plan office of all time, and everyone's invited. You can almost hear a medieval HR rep in the background whispering, "This is for the good of the realm." You and your new spouse sit side by side on the vast, over-decorated bed. The sheets are so heavily embroidered, they might as well be medieval chainmail, and the mattress sags like it's already exhausted by the prospect of what's to come. A hush falls over the crowd as the Queen's lady-in-waiting fluffs a pillow with the gravity of a high priestess. There's a soft cough in the back, possibly from the bishop, or possibly from your own dignity. Let's set the scene. In an age when most people don't even take their socks off to bathe, here you are, expected to disrobe before a jury of your ancestors, the clergy, and anyone who wandered into the wrong corridor. You try to remember if anyone explained the choreography for this moment, but your wedding tutor seemed to skip straight from how to hold a goblet to how to greet a visiting ambassador, and left out how to perform under medieval stage lighting. There's no gentle background music. Instead, a court minstrel stands by with a lute, fingers hovering, waiting for the signal to start a tune. The jester, bless him, makes himself as small as possible, nervously juggling 2 apples and a candlestick as a distraction from the main event. Someone, somewhere, is already taking notes for the family chronicles. You'll probably be immortalized in the annals as that king who tripped over his own breeches in front of the archbishop. But why, you may ask, did anyone put themselves through this medieval nightmare? Simple: legitimacy. In an age when the royal bloodline was the only thing more fragile than the castle plumbing, everyone needed to be absolutely indisputably sure that the marriage was both real and, well, functional. If a royal heir showed up next spring, no one wanted a suspicious uncle raising doubts or a rival noble muttering about witchcraft. Public consummation was the original paternity test, just with more witnesses and significantly fewer swabs. And so, the show goes on. The bishops begin a prayer, one for fertility, one for a speedy outcome, and one, perhaps, for the king's nerves. Nobles stand around pretending to be fascinated by the ceiling beams, while the older ladies of the court offer encouraging nods and unsolicited advice. The queen's mother folds her hands in satisfaction, having seen this exact ceremony at least 4 times already, each more awkward than the last. For you, the newly crowned monarch, the challenge is both physical and emotional. How do you find romance when your father-in-law is squinting from the corner, as if trying to confirm technique? How do you focus on your spouse's eyes when a monk keeps clearing his throat in the rhythm of the church bells? And who decided that every bedpost needed a witness? Eventually, someone draws the curtains, not to block out the crowd, but to create the illusion of privacy. The crowd, ever so polite, listens for signs of consummation, ready to erupt in applause or, in the event of failure, book the chamber for a repeat performance tomorrow night. Because in medieval Europe, even intimacy had an audience, and the show always went on. So next time you light a candle for romance, be grateful your bedroom doesn't come with stadium seating and a guest list longer than the succession crisis. At least in the modern world, the only person judging your honeymoon is your cat, privacy. In the modern world, it's a basic right, guaranteed by law, window blinds, and that little do not disturb sign you sometimes forget to flip over at hotels. In the medieval world, it's more of a rumor. You might hear whispers of privacy echoing through the stone halls, but you're far more likely to run into your mother-in-law while looking for a moment alone than find a place to actually be alone. Let's take a tour of your brand new royal bedchamber. The good news. It has 4 walls and a roof, which already puts you ahead of most of your subjects, who are lucky if their homes can keep out the chickens. The bad news. The walls are thinner than your patience, and the roof is mostly for show. Every footstep in the corridor echoes through your room like a medieval drum solo. The only thing thicker than the air in your chamber is the curtain that's supposed to separate your private life from the rest of the court. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. If you're hoping for locks on the door, think again. Most royal chambers don't have keys, just a big wooden latch and a heavy tapestry featuring a saint who looks far too judgmental for comfort. Even if you manage to close the door, anyone with status, ambition, or a good reason to gossip can and will walk right in. Royal servants treat boundaries like suggestions. If you want to change into your nightshirt, expect at least 2 attendants to rush in with a basin, 3 more to fluff your pillows, and a confused kitchen boy who just wanted to borrow a candle. And the windows? Oh, those glorious arrow slits that let in both light and the enthusiastic sound of peasants fighting over a turnip outside. Sometimes you wonder if the architects designed the castle specifically so everyone could overhear everyone else's business. If you cough, a scribe in the next tower will jot it down. If you sneeze, a rumor starts in the great hall that the king is dying of some mysterious French disease. Trying to whisper sweet nothings to your spouse? Good luck. The sound bounces off the stone walls and right into the eager ears of your rival's cousin. Let's talk about the royal household. On paper, it's a tight-knit team of loyal professionals. In reality, it's a revolving door of servants, advisors, and distant relatives who always seem to need just a moment with the king. Your schedule? Public. Your meals? Public. Your bedtime routine? Highly supervised. There's a courtier in charge of your slippers, another for your nightcap, and someone else whose sole job is to check if you snore too loudly for diplomatic guests. If you try to sneak a moment to yourself, you'll be found within minutes. Maybe you'll duck into the royal library, hoping to read a scroll in peace. Bad move, the court tutor is already there, loudly reciting the lineage of every plant in the herb garden. Try the chapel? The bishop is mid-sermon, and the cleaning staff are dusting the altar with the intensity of a full-scale exorcism. The gardens? Sure, but the Queen's ladies-in-waiting are already 3 steps ahead, giggling over last night's ceremony and eyeing you with barely disguised amusement. And let's not forget the royal bodyguards. Their definition of protection involves standing as close as humanly possible at all times. Need to adjust your crown? They're there. Want to take a discreet stroll? Suddenly, it's a parade. Even in the bath, you're not alone. The king's tub is the social hub of the castle, a place where lords drop in for advice and servants top off your water while discussing the weather. In a world without privacy, the art of eavesdropping is a prized skill. Gossip flows like wine at a feast. Every mishap, every sigh, every suspiciously long silence behind a curtain is fair game for the medieval rumour mill. Forget personal secrets. Here, even your hiccups are a public event. So if you're feeling brave and a little rebellious, you might just pull the curtain closed, take a deep breath, and hope no one's peeking through the keyhole. Just remember, in medieval times, privacy wasn't an option. It was a luxury reserved for people with better doors, thicker walls, and no royal responsibilities, which, in this castle, is basically no one at all. You might think the worst part about being king is remembering everyone's name at dinner. But no, it's waking up on your wedding night and realizing you have an audience. And not just any audience, an audience with opinions, religious authority, and a tendency to take notes. You'd think a royal honeymoon would be an intimate event. Instead, it's the world's least sexy team-building exercise. Let's paint the scene. It's late, the torches are guttering in their sconces, and the air in the chamber is thick with anticipation and an overwhelming smell of beeswax. As the royal couple steps into the bedchamber, a small crowd shuffles in after them. Who made the guest list? The answer is, unfortunately, everyone who matters. You've got senior nobles, eager to confirm the legitimacy of tomorrow's headlines. The clergy, ever vigilant, are present in full regalia, because nothing says romance like a bishop humming hymns at the end of your bed. And of course, there's the ever-present royal scribe, ready to immortalize the event in florid, deeply uncomfortable Latin. Then there's that guy from the treasury, the medieval equivalent of an accountant, who absolutely shouldn't be here, but somehow always is, fussing over the cost of the bedsheets and whether this counts as overtime. The steward, responsible for everything from dinner to dignity, is lurking at the door, quill in hand, eyes wide with a mixture of pride and existential dread. Your personal physician hovers, just in case someone faints from shock or boredom or just a surplus of ceremonial incense. And don't forget the Queen's ladies-in-waiting, whose job seems to be equal parts chaperone, emotional support, and enthusiastic gossip generator. They cluster near the bed, exchanging sidelong glances and betting quietly on how long the ceremony will take. The royal confessor stands solemnly in the corner, making everyone just a little more anxious, as if a sin might leap out from behind the wardrobe at any moment. But why so many witnesses? Simple. Trust issues. In an age when paternity was a matter of national security and succession crises lurked around every stone pillar, the more eyes on the event, the better. It's like having a notary public at your birthday party. Awkward. Unnecessary. But apparently crucial for the paperwork. Everyone is here to make sure the marriage is real, legitimate, and thoroughly witnessed. If an heir arrives in 9 months, no one can claim the king sent a stand-in or the queen snuck out for a medieval spa night. The job of the witnesses is to guarantee that the royal couple did, in fact, get on with it. It's not enough for them to just be present, either. Some courts insisted on active observation. The clergy might offer prayers for fertility, the nobles might record the exact timing, and the scribe will definitely immortalize your blushes for the family archives. Sometimes, if the king or queen had powerful enemies, rival lords would angle for a spot in the room, hoping to catch a scandal or at least some juicy gossip. If a performance issue arises, the witnesses may be forced to file out and return for a second round. The royal equivalent of hitting refresh on the world's most uncomfortable webpage. It's a high-stakes performance, and the pressure is legendary. Whispered advice from well-meaning uncles is matched only by the judgmental side-eye from the archbishop. The room is thick with expectation, and you, the king, are expected to deliver, not just for love or for lineage, but for a courtroom full of people with nothing better to do on a Wednesday night. So you do your best. The witnesses look on, some pretending not to look, others making mental notes for tomorrow's rumors. Eventually, when the deed is satisfactorily accomplished, there's a collective sigh of relief, some polite applause, and more than a few people who immediately start planning the next royal celebration. As for you, you'll never look at your witness list the same way again. If you thought your wedding night was already crowded, just wait until the clergy get involved. In the medieval world, religion wasn't just a Sunday affair, it followed you everywhere, right into the bedroom. The royal bed was as much a place of ceremony as the cathedral altar. And tonight, every bump in the mattress comes with a prayer, and possibly a reading from Leviticus. It begins with a procession, because, naturally, even the simple act of getting into bed requires a parade. The bishop enters first, resplendent in robes and trailing incense, followed by priests, choir boys, and the all-important holy relic, which, in this case, might be a suspiciously well-worn saint's finger or a splinter from the true cross. The Queen's ladies are in attendance, lips pursed in their best. I am not judging you, but I absolutely am expressions. Somewhere in the corner, a monk is humming a hymn that sounds suspiciously like the melody for Onward Christian Soldiers. Before anyone can so much as sit on the edge of the mattress, the bishop must bless the bed. This is not a quick sprinkle and dash operation. It is a full ceremony, with Latin chants, flicking holy water onto the pillows, and sometimes even reciting special prayers for the successful union soon to occur. If you're lucky, the water evaporates before you have to actually lie down. If not, you'll spend the night with a wet patch that's more sanctified than comfortable. Let's talk about the bed itself. Forget satin sheets and mood lighting. The royal bed is a four-poster construction more suited for jousting than romance. Huge wooden posts carved with religious symbols tower over you, as if to remind you that God is watching. And not just God, your ancestors, the saints. And, if the tapestry is to be believed, a few wide-eyed angels. The mattress is stuffed with straw, feathers, and a decent amount of anxiety. The sheets, just blessed, are crisp with holy starch. Once the blessing is complete, the clergy are not quick to leave. The bishop offers words of advice. Be fruitful and multiply, he intones, a phrase that in this context sounds less like spiritual guidance and more like a deadline. Sometimes a priest will leave behind a relic for luck. Nothing says romance like a mummified saint's toe on your nightstand. And if fertility is a major concern, a monk might hang a talisman over the bedpost, just in case divine intervention needs a gentle reminder. Of course, this is not merely for show. In medieval minds, the success of the royal bedchamber had cosmic importance. A happy, fruitful union was seen as proof of divine favor. The future of the dynasty, the stability of the kingdom, even the health of the land itself, all these were thought to hang on whether or not the king and queen received the right blessings. If crops failed or wars went badly, You could be sure someone would whisper about a cursed wedding bed or a bishop who flubbed the Latin. As you prepare for the main event, the clergy gather in the next room, not so much leaving as waiting just out of sight. You can still hear the choir boys murmuring, the bishop clearing his throat. Occasionally, someone pops back in to check if the blessed candle has burned low enough to signal mission accomplished. It's hard to be passionate when every sound is being analyzed for liturgical meaning. For the royal couple, it's a surreal blend of pressure and piety. You're not just consummating a marriage, you're upholding the will of God, the hopes of your people, and your family's good name. Even the bedposts are in on the action, creaking a little louder, as if to join the chorus of encouragement and caution. And if, by some miracle, everything goes smoothly, the clergy are quick to take credit. If not, well, perhaps there's a backup saint's finger for next time. So tonight, as you settle in between the blessed sheets and under the watchful eyes of both heaven and earth, remember, in medieval times, there was no such thing as a truly private moment. Even your mattress had a prayer. It's official. You've survived the wedding feast, the endless blessings, and the sight of 3 bishops lingering near your pillow like nervous chaperones. Now comes the main event, the consummation ceremony, a phrase that sounds clinical, but in practice is more like a medieval variety show with uncomfortable audience participation. The chamber is aglow with dozens of candles, each one strategically placed by servants who seem to believe intimacy requires the same lighting as a royal banquet. Shadows leap along the walls, flickering over velvet drapes and the worried faces of every attendant. There's a chill in the air, but the heat of anticipation, and perhaps mild embarrassment, makes your skin prickle. Somewhere nearby, the court's official candle lighter is still adding new flames, determined to make sure not a single detail escapes observation. As the ceremony begins, the Queen's ladies-in-waiting help her out of her wedding finery and into a more suitable nightgown, one that's both modest and inexplicably ruffled. Meanwhile, the king's attendants make a great show of removing his doublet, boots, and, with some effort, his ceremonial sword. For a brief moment, you wonder if the sword is allowed to stay. But it's quickly whisked away, replaced with a heavy robe and an encouraging shoulder squeeze. The witnesses, nobles, clergy, that ever-present royal scribe, and a few lesser courtiers who wandered in by accident, gather in an arc at the foot of the bed, as if expecting to watch a particularly confusing stage play. The bishop coughs discreetly. A nobleman checks his pocket sundial. A page boy, much too young for this, averts his eyes and tries to think about turnips. The master of ceremonies, yes, that's a real job tonight, announces that everything is in order. He raises a gilded staff, signals the musicians to stop playing, and recites a prayer that is equal parts blessing and motivational speech. There are requests for fertility, health, and a swift resolution, with just a hint of competitive edge. After all, a successful ceremony means fewer rounds of repeat performances. The bed, newly blessed and now center stage, looks less like a sanctuary and more like an altar. Candles on every post cast halos of golden light, illuminating every awkward expression. The royal couple, seated on the edge, exchange nervous glances. It's hard to feel romantic when the only thing separating you from the audience is a slightly threadbare velvet curtain, which an overeager squire keeps trying to adjust for maximum visibility. Just as things are about to begin, someone remembers the proof. In many kingdoms, a special linen sheet, pure white, naturally, is laid atop the bed, ready to serve as physical evidence of the union's success. The sheet will later be inspected, sometimes paraded through the castle like a trophy. There is much discussion about placement, as if the right corner of the bed will make all the difference. As the royal couple climb beneath the covers, there is a final flurry of whispered advice. An elderly countess offers unsolicited tips on timing. The queen's aunt hands over a sachet of herbs for courage. A monk mutters something about the rhythm of the psalms. If you were hoping for a discreet, private moment, you'll have to wait until the next dynasty. The curtain is finally drawn, not closed, but just enough to give the illusion of privacy. The witnesses shuffle back, straining to catch a glimpse or a sound that will confirm the act. For the royal couple, it's a surreal, nerve-wracking moment. The stakes are high. The kingdom is watching. Every creak of the bed, every muffled giggle from the gallery becomes part of history. And when it's over, the master of ceremonies steps forward, records the event in the royal logbook, and the crowd disperses, some relieved, some disappointed, all eager to start gossiping before the candles have even cooled. In medieval Europe, love wasn't just blind, it was extremely well lit and never, ever private. In most marriages, the awkwardness ends when the last guest leaves and you finally close the bedroom door. In a medieval royal marriage, that's when things really get started, on paper at least, because even after the candles sputter out and the last bishop shuffles out of your bedchamber, there's one more ritual: the official recording of your union. Think of it as the world's least romantic paperwork. As dawn creeps through the arrow slits, the court springs into action. The king and queen, looking only slightly more rumpled than usual, barely have time to pull the covers back up before a fresh round of witnesses, scribes, and document bearers descend upon the royal bed. Someone has already set up a writing desk at the foot of the bed, complete with a stack of vellum, a pot of ink, and an official wax seal that's been waiting all night for its big moment. There's even a court painter sketching the scene, because nothing says privacy like your first moments as a couple being immortalized for posterity. First in line is the royal scribe, whose job tonight is the medieval equivalent of a notary public with a flair for dramatic prose. He clears his throat and begins to dictate, quill poised, capturing every important detail with all the subtlety of a town crier. On the 8th day of the month of May, in the year of our Lord, the noble King Henry and the virtuous Queen Matilda did verily unite in flesh and in faith, in the sight of God, the court, and at least 3 dogs who wouldn't leave the chamber. He adds a flourish, underlines the date, and glances up for nods of approval. But wait, there's more. Now comes the time for sworn testimonies. The highest-ranking nobles step forward to affirm, in grave and serious tones, that the royal marriage was indeed consummated, and that they personally observed, or at least heard, all the necessary sounds to confirm as much. There's usually a brief debate about who was closest to the action and whether the curtains truly provided any obscuring of vision, but these details are soon glossed over with diplomatic skill. The clergy have their own forms to fill out, complete with prayers, signatures, and a small mountain of wax seals. The bishop, who has probably seen more royal unions than he'd like, mumbles a benediction over the documents and stamps them with his personal signet. Sometimes, if the kingdom is especially scandal-prone, the paperwork will be copied and distributed to various lords and even foreign courts, just to ensure nobody tries to challenge the legitimacy later. A royal marriage wasn't official until it was witnessed, written, signed, and sent out for medieval peer review. As the parchment dries, the master of ceremonies organizes a brief but lively debate about what, exactly, should be included in the historical record. Should they mention the Queen's particularly ruffled nightcap, the King's brief misadventure with a stubborn boot? In the end, it's usually decided that a few dignified euphemisms will suffice. All matters were completed to the satisfaction of the assembled becomes the catchphrase of the day. With the ink barely dry, the final step arrives: the delivery of the official record to the kingdom's archives, where it will rest alongside centuries of similar documents. Some kings kept their certificates close, just in case a rival challenged the union in court. Others preferred to forget the entire business as quickly as possible. The whole process is less about love and more about legal protection. In a world obsessed with lineage and legitimacy, the written record is everything. If anyone tries to question the future royal baby's claim to the throne, the king can simply wave the parchment and say, "It's signed, sealed, and delivered. Now kindly mind your own business." And with that, the royal couple can finally, truly relax. The candles have melted, the ink is dry, and the witnesses have shuffled off to gossip over breakfast. At last, the marriage is official, by decree, by record, and by an entire court that just won't mind their own business. You might be wondering, why did medieval people put so much effort and so many eyeballs into the royal honeymoon? Was there really no other way to spend a Wednesday night? At the heart of this royal circus is the one thing every medieval kingdom feared more than war, famine, or running out of ale: an illegitimate heir. In a world where thrones were won, lost, and occasionally stolen by cousins with flexible morals, making sure the next king or queen was the real deal wasn't just tradition, it was survival. Let's start with the basics. Succession. For a kingdom to endure, you needed an heir. But not just any child would do. The heir had to be indisputably of royal blood, born to the right parents, and ideally witnessed by half the aristocracy. If there was even a hint that the baby wasn't the king's, disaster could follow. Rival claimants would appear out of nowhere, like medieval lawyers crawling from the woodwork, each holding up some tattered family tree and insisting they had just as much right to the throne as the king's own son. Civil wars, assassinations, poisoned goblets, these weren't rare, they were practically part of the onboarding process. That's why the royal marriage had to be seen, signed, and certified by every bishop, baron, and occasionally a deeply confused kitchen servant. The kingdom's stability depended on it. No one wanted to risk a repeat of last century's succession crisis that shall not be named, when two brothers, a disgruntled uncle, and at least one horse all claimed the crown in the same week. Legitimacy wasn't just a word. It was the line between a peaceful reign and a decade of angry nobles throwing things at each other. But legitimacy wasn't just about blood. It was about suspicion too. In a royal court, trust was rare, and paranoia was standard issue. There were always rumors swirling about the king's health, the queen's loyalties, the legitimacy of the latest heir, and even the mysterious comings and goings of the royal midwife. If the king spent too much time in the garden, or the queen seemed a little too fond of the lute teacher, tongues would wag. The only way to kill a rumor was to drown it in witnesses, documents, and, occasionally, a live performance. Add to this a dash of medieval soap opera. Royal courts thrived on drama. Gossip was as essential as bread. Nobles vied for position, alliances shifted daily, and anyone with ambition learned to wield rumors like daggers. If there was even a whiff of scandal, the story would spread from the kitchens to the farthest village before the ink on the marriage certificate had dried. And nothing fueled a court's imagination like the question of who fathered the next heir. For queens, the pressure was immense. Producing a legitimate son was more than a personal hope. It was a professional requirement. The court would watch her waistline, count the months from wedding to birth, and calculate backwards with the enthusiasm of Olympic mathematicians. If the timing seemed off, suspicions could flare into accusations, and accusations could end with a trip to a windswept nunnery, or worse. For kings, the stakes were just as high. An heir meant continuity, respect, and the ability to sleep at night. Well, until the next rebellion. This was why public consummation, witness lists, and bedsheet inspections became such a spectacle. It was about providing undeniable proof. With so many eyes on the process, it became nearly impossible for anyone to cast doubt, though that never stopped the more creative courtiers from trying. So yes, the fuss was about more than tradition. It was about survival. It was about politics, paranoia, and the kind of drama that would put modern soap operas to shame. And in the end, it was about giving everyone, king, queen, and kingdom, a fighting chance at stability, even if it meant sacrificing every last shred of privacy. In medieval Europe, the stakes weren't just high, they were historic. It's easy to focus on the king during these medieval honeymoon rituals, but let's spare a thought for the queen, the woman at the center of the spectacle, juggling royal duty, social expectation, and her own sanity, all while wearing 3 layers of lace and a politely terrified expression. For the new queen, the royal wedding isn't the end of stress. It's the beginning of a high-stakes career with more scrutiny than a modern celebrity on reality TV. Her job description is simple: look radiant, stay silent, and produce an heir before anyone can start a betting pool. If she's lucky, she's been given a crash course in royal etiquette: when to curtsy, how to smile without showing too many teeth, and what to do if the king faints at the crucial moment. Spoiler: keep smiling and pray for the bishop to declare it a minor miracle. Tonight, privacy is not just a luxury, it's a myth. As the door closes and the procession of witnesses files in, the queen faces an audience that rivals most theatre troupes. Her ladies-in-waiting hover nearby, ready to offer a hand, a whisper of advice, or, in desperate cases, a well-timed cough to cover any awkward silences. Across the room, the royal scribe sharpens his quill. The bishop eyes her with the concern of a man who's officiated too many unions and still hasn't quite figured out the choreography. If the king is nervous, the queen is expected to be the calm center of the storm. No matter what happens, or doesn't happen, her role is to maintain dignity and composure, even if she'd rather crawl under the bed than be under the spotlight. It's not just her reputation at stake. It's the future of the entire dynasty. Every gesture is loaded with significance. If she blushes, it's interpreted as maidenly modesty. If she laughs, it's a sign of confidence. If she accidentally trips over her petticoat, it's a bad omen, and someone in the court will write a poem about it. There's also the matter of the infamous evidence. In many kingdoms, the queen's first official act as a married woman is to produce a bedsheet that proves consummation. This sheet, usually white, always scrutinized, is handed over to the senior ladies of the court and sometimes displayed for public inspection. For the queen, it's the least romantic laundry day in history. She's expected to handle it with grace, even as her nerves scream for a locked door and a stiff drink. And let's not forget the pressure to produce an heir, preferably male, preferably soon. From the moment the wedding is over, the queen's body becomes national property, the subject of endless speculation and thinly disguised medical advice from every matron with a living child. Did she eat enough pomegranates? Was the moon in the right phase? Has she avoided cold draughts, strong cheese, and sullen glances from rival duchesses? If her waistline expands, the court celebrates. If it doesn't, rumors start. Every missed period is a national news bulletin, every craving a reason for a fresh round of prayers. Behind closed curtains, the queen might allow herself a sigh, a brief moment of reflection amid the pageantry. She may wonder what life would have been like as a miller's daughter or a merchant's wife, free from prying eyes and sacred relics on the nightstand. She might even envy the peasant women outside the palace, whose marriages involve less paperwork and significantly fewer bishops. But the queen knows her duty, and she shoulders it with stoic grace. Through nerves and noise, through gossip and grand expectations, she manages to perform her role, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes admirably, always under scrutiny, because in the end, the queen's perspective isn't just about her own wishes, it's about the hopes of a dynasty, the demands of tradition, and the quietly heroic act of surviving it all with her dignity intact. Outside the castle walls, while the nobility are busy perfecting their ceremonial size and composing Latin marriage records, the real party is in the village. For the peasants, the royal consummation isn't just a political event, it's the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster premiere, reality TV, and stand-up comedy, all rolled into one long, candlelit night. Word spreads fast in the countryside, especially when there's a royal wedding. The village is abuzz for weeks beforehand. Bread gets baked, ale barrels are rolled out, and everyone pretends to be busier than usual in case a passing noble decides to recruit them for an important errand. On consummation night, no one actually expects an invitation to the castle, but everyone hopes for a scrap of gossip, a second-hand story, or maybe, just maybe, a blurry glimpse through a window if they're very, very lucky and highly motivated. The castle itself glows in the distance, torches flickering like fireflies. Peasants gather near the gate, straining to hear anything that might resemble a royal cheer or a scandalous mishap. The local tavern becomes headquarters for wild speculation. Old Tom the shepherd claims he once heard a king sneeze during the ceremony and insists it's a sign of future prosperity. Edith, the baker's wife, swears her cousin's friend's uncle saw the queen's slipper fall off, a clear omen of twins. The jokes practically write themselves. "Did you hear," whispers one farmer, "that the king couldn't find his nightshirt and had to borrow a monk's robe?" Laughter erupts. Someone else adds, "I bet Lady Agnes is still in the room, hiding under the bed." No one knows what's really going on behind those stone walls, but that doesn't stop anyone from embellishing the details. Stories grow wilder with every retelling. The king fainted. The queen winked at the jester. The bishop got locked out of the chamber and had to bless the bed through the keyhole. Children weave through the crowds, carrying makeshift crowns and pretending to be royalty. Their version of the ceremony involves loud declarations, dramatic swooning, and the occasional mud pie wedding cake. Every dog in the village seems to bark at once, convinced that tonight is special, at least until someone drops a sausage on the ground. The tavern owner, never one to waste a marketing opportunity, names a new brew Royal Red and encourages patrons to drink every time someone mentions the word heir. By midnight, the crowd is giggling, bellies full, and imaginations running wild. Music spills out onto the street, rough fiddles, clapping hands, the thump of boots on packed earth. It's not quite a courtly dance, but it has twice the enthusiasm and none of the formality. Peasants know that tonight's entertainment comes courtesy of the nobility's obsession with lineage. The more absurd the ritual, the better the stories. If the king succeeds, the village celebrates, hopeful that a stable succession means fewer taxes and no surprise wars. If he fails, well, there's always next year, and, in the meantime, the jokes just get better. No one expects to be consulted about royal politics, but everyone feels invested in the outcome. After all, the fate of the kingdom trickles down, one way or another, and even the most private royal moments have a public ripple effect. As dawn approaches and the castle quiets, the villagers drift home, still sharing stories and predictions. Tomorrow, the market will buzz with fresh rumors. Someone will claim to have found a stray lock of the queen's hair, and another will swear they saw a royal sheet hanging out to dry. For the peasants, history is always best when it comes with a side of laughter. And so, while the royal couple recovers from their long, exhausting, extremely public night, the people outside the palace walls enjoy the most ancient of human pastimes, telling stories about the rich and powerful, and finding ways to turn even the grandest ceremony into a punchline. If you think modern celebrity gossip is relentless, you've never experienced the medieval court. where everyone is both a spectator and a self-appointed columnist, and the only thing more durable than a royal scandal is the tapestry someone will inevitably embroider to commemorate it. In the world of kings and queens, the aftermath of the wedding night isn't peace and quiet. It's the beginning of a new chapter in the never-ending saga of noble rumors. Let's set the scene. The royal couple has finally been left alone. Sort of. The candles have burned low, and the court has dispersed. Or at least, they've left the bedchamber. Now they're lingering in corridors, alcoves, and around the morning breakfast tables, replaying every cough, creak, and whispered prayer from the ceremony. If a dog barked at an inopportune moment, it's already been turned into a metaphor for royal virility. If the king sneezed, the jesters are working that into their comedy routines for the next feast. This is where the real fun begins. The medieval rumour mill, powered by noblemen with nothing better to do, ambitious ladies in waiting, and servants whose hearing is suspiciously acute. Servants, after all, are the original tabloid reporters. They see everything, hear everything, and have an uncanny ability to accidentally drop hints to anyone within earshot. Lady Eleanor's maid swears she saw the king's slippers on the wrong side of the bed. The cook is certain she heard 3 cheers instead of 2. Proof, apparently, of an extra enthusiastic royal performance. The written word is just as important. Medieval courts are filled with scribes and chroniclers, whose job is to record important moments for posterity. But objectivity is a lost cause. Their notes are sprinkled with sly asides, dramatic pauses, and the kind of commentary that would make a modern gossip blogger blush. His Majesty retired to the nuptial chamber, with a vigour seldom seen outside the jousting lists, one might write, while another observes that Her Majesty's complexion was most becoming despite the hour. Code for. She blushed. We're not sure why. But the ultimate form of medieval gossip? The tapestry. Yes, the humble wall hanging is more than decoration. It's a long-lasting, slow-motion scandal sheet. Talented embroiderers will spend weeks capturing the highlights or lowlights of royal life. There's nothing like seeing your most embarrassing moment immortalized in colored thread, hung up in the Great Hall, and used as a teaching tool for future generations. That, children, is why you always tie your robe securely. Some future nursemaid will say, pointing to a depiction of the king's wardrobe malfunction. Of course, the nobles aren't above weaponizing gossip. A clever baroness can turn a raised eyebrow into a full-blown crisis with the right audience. Was the Queen's laugh too hearty? Was the bishop's blessing too brief? Was the sheet not displayed quickly enough? Or was it perhaps a little too clean? These details can spark years of speculation. Sometimes, the gossip is used as leverage. Remember the night of the velvet curtain? Someone will whisper during delicate negotiations, raising the stakes with nothing but a well-placed anecdote. Meanwhile, outside the palace, minstrels and bards pick up the juiciest tidbits and weave them into bawdy songs and comic tales. By the time the story reaches the countryside, it's unrecognizable. The king juggled candlesticks. The queen danced a jig. The bishop tripped over the relics. None of it is true, of course, but that hardly matters. The royal wedding night becomes legend, retold and reimagined until the next scandal comes along. Through all of this, one thing is certain. No secret stays secret for long in a medieval court. From tapestries to tattletales, the story of your first night as a royal couple will live on, embroidered, sung, and whispered for generations, proving, once again, that history isn't written by the victors. It's written by the nosiest person with a needle and thread. For most newlyweds, making a family is a private matter, something whispered about in the quiet hours, shielded from nosy neighbors and the in-laws. But if you're the king and queen of a medieval realm, you can forget all that. Fertility is not just your business. It's everybody's business. Your personal life is public policy, and the hopes of the kingdom ride on what happens after the crowd clears out, assuming they clear out at all. Let's start with the stakes. In the medieval world, the king's most important job, right after don't get assassinated, is to produce an heir. Without a clear successor, kingdoms collapse into chaos. Cousins sharpen their daggers, ambitious barons start weighing their own claims, and distant relatives send awkward letters about lost branches of the royal family tree. Entire wars start over the question of who's next in line. So, for the sake of everyone's nerves and the stability of the economy, making a royal baby is not optional. It's a matter of state survival. Enter the audience. The more people who witness the beginning of the next generation, the better. It's a living insurance policy against future drama. If the queen gives birth to a child 9 months later, and everyone saw the king put in the required effort, the line of succession is secure. No one can accuse the baby of being the baker's son or the result of an enthusiastic lute lesson. With dozens of witnesses, nobles, clergy, a suspiciously interested tapestry weaver, there's no doubt about the child's parentage. This is why the consummation ceremony is so public, so formal, and so heavily documented. It isn't about embarrassing the royal couple. Well, not entirely. It's about proof. If the court sees the marriage consummated, the kingdom has an ironclad answer to any future whispers. How do we know the prince is legitimate? Asks a rival. Well, says a countess, I was there, and let me tell you, it was thorough. There's also a powerful element of symbolism at work. Medieval people believed that royal fertility reflected the health of the land itself. If the queen conceived quickly, it was a sign of God's blessing, an omen of good harvests, peace, and prosperity. If conception was delayed, people grew nervous. What had the king or queen done wrong? Was the marriage truly valid? Was the dynasty cursed? Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by anxious courtiers and local priests eager to suggest more blessings or, in desperate times, more vigorous efforts from the royal couple. For queens, the pressure was relentless. Every month without news was another reason for the court to whisper and plot. Well-meaning ladies-in-waiting offered herbal teas and unsolicited advice. Priests upped the prayer schedule. The royal physician recommended restful walks and calm evenings, as if that were possible with half the country peeking through the bed curtains. For kings, the expectations were just as high. One misstep, one hint of weakness, and suddenly the family line is in jeopardy. Medieval masculinity was measured in heirs per decade. Even after a child was born, the scrutiny didn't stop. People counted the months from the wedding to the birth, analyzed the baby's features, and compared the color of his hair to every major noble in the realm. Did he have the king's nose? The queen's eyes? Or did he look suspiciously like the visiting French ambassador? If the timeline didn't match up, someone always had a theory. In short, the fertility stakes were enormous, and public consummation was the kingdom's way of hedging its bets. The act was less about love and more about law, legitimacy, and avoiding the kind of dynastic crises that fill history books and, centuries later, YouTube sleep stories. For the royal couple, it was the world's most important group project, graded in heirs, not applause, and in the medieval world, you only passed if everyone agreed you'd done your homework. If you grew up mortified by your school's version of the talk, spare a sympathetic sigh for the medieval king and queen, because in the Middle Ages, there was no discreet pamphlet, no giggling health teacher, and certainly no YouTube tutorial. Medieval sex ed was less about science and more about hearsay, holy water, and enough superstition to make your local apothecary weep. Start with the basics. Who actually gave the royal couple their marital advice? In theory, a trusted elder, often the Queen Mother or a bishop, was supposed to impart wisdom before the big night. In practice, it was more like a relay race of half-remembered folklore, nervous whispers, and conflicting instructions delivered by people who never seemed to agree on anything except the importance of producing heirs as soon as possible. Some queens were handed a religious tract and told to be dutiful. Some kings got a short, awkward talk from an uncle who clearly wished he was somewhere else. And then there were the actual lessons. If you were lucky, someone would explain the general mechanics, using language so flowery and indirect that you needed a code book and several hours to work out what went where. You must till the field, sow the blessed seed, and hope the Lord sends rain, an aunt might say, which is either advice about marriage or instructions for growing turnips. No one was entirely sure. Directness was not the medieval way. Instead, the couple received a litany of do's and don'ts, passed down like family heirlooms. Avoid strong cheese, warns the priest. Don't do it on Fridays, saints' days, or under a waning moon, adds a grandmother. The royal physician has strong feelings about optimal temperature and moon phase, and the midwife mutters dire predictions about what happens if you sneeze at the wrong moment. Somewhere in there is an actual useful tip, but it's buried under an avalanche of superstition. Most of the instruction boiled down to don't enjoy it too much, but make sure it works. Medieval Christianity saw marital intimacy as a sacred duty, not a source of fun. Pleasure was, at best, a tolerated side effect. Any hint of enthusiasm was quietly discouraged, unless it led to a male heir, in which case everyone pretended not to notice. If you were especially unlucky, you got a visit from the bishop, who reminded you that angels were watching and that the correct number of thrusts was a topic hotly debated by theologians. Physical anatomy? That was a guessing game. No one wanted to discuss it. Few understood it, and artistic depictions in medieval manuscripts ranged from the baffling to the biologically impossible. One wrong turn in the garden of love, and you'd end up with advice like, make sure the humours are balanced, or always keep your socks on for modesty. Medical books, when they existed, were equal parts folklore and alarming illustrations. The best diagrams looked like root vegetables crossed with farm animals. For queens, the ladies-in-waiting gathered to share advice, a combination of ancient recipes, herbal remedies, and gossip. Drink this tea for twins, says one. Sleep with your head facing north, says another. The king's side was worse, more bluster, more superstition, and endless unsolicited advice from knights who claimed expertise for no apparent reason. And through it all, the royal couple just tried to survive the night without accidentally invoking a curse, breaking a taboo, or causing the bishop to faint. When the curtains finally closed and the last prayer was whispered, most newlyweds were left with little more than a handful of confusing metaphors, a pile of blessed linens, and a vague hope that at least some of the advice was useful. So next time you think, modern sex ed is awkward, remember, at least you never had to decipher marital advice that doubled as weather forecasting and agricultural planning. For the medieval royals, the most important lesson was simply to hope, pray, and improvise, while the whole kingdom waited to see how they did. So, the royal wedding night has arrived, the bed has been blessed, the crowd has assembled, and everyone's waiting for the main event. The pressure is on, so much pressure, in fact, that you could turn grapes into wine with just a nervous glance. But what happens when the king, the very picture of royal might in public, finds himself frozen at the critical moment? Welcome to the medieval nightmare known as royal stage fright. First, let's set the scene. The air is thick with expectation and candle smoke. The queen is trying her best to look serene, even as her cheeks flush with anxiety and the distant sound of whispered prayers. The bishop is fidgeting with his cross. Nobles hover nearby, making mental bets on how quickly things will proceed. And the king, who's led men into battle and survived assassination attempts, suddenly finds his confidence has left the building. Stage fright is not just a modern phenomenon. Imagine the pressure. Your dynasty depends on your performance, your reputation, your legacy, and sometimes even your life rest on this moment. And to make it worse, you're being watched by a crowd who might as well be holding up scorecards. No pressure, right? It's a wonder any king succeeded at all. For some, the stress was simply too much. Hands shook. Faces paled. At least one monarch probably considered climbing out the window and living in the forest as a peasant named Gerald. So, what happened when the king couldn't deliver? The answer depended on the court's level of panic. Usually, the witnesses tried to save face, loudly clearing their throats, making distracting conversation, or inventing an emergency that required everyone to leave the room for just a moment. The Queen's ladies-in-waiting offered herbal remedies, some for nerves, others for more direct encouragement. The royal physician was summoned, armed with dubious potions and words like virility and humor balance. A nervous advisor might suggest trying again later, perhaps after a cup of spiced wine or a midnight snack. Of course, this wasn't just a personal embarrassment, it was a national crisis. Rumors spread faster than a peasant at tax time. Did the king lack vigor? Was it a sign from God? Had the queen bewitched him? Had someone slipped a curse under the mattress? Medieval minds raced with possibilities. And before you could say chamomile tea, the local priest was doubling the prayer schedule and burning extra incense in the chapel. If a repeat performance was needed, the pressure only grew. The entire court braced itself for round 2. Sometimes the very next night. Sometimes after a few days of rest and reflection. In France, one famous king's bedroom troubles became so notorious that they made it into official records, discussed by everyone from cardinals to street performers. Sometimes, treaties hung in the balance. The in-laws waited, nations watched, and the king tried very hard not to think about how everyone's breakfast conversation would hinge on his bedtime results. Some courts had an official remedial team, a combination of doctors, clergy, and elderly aunts ready to coach, coax, or cajole the king back to form. Advice poured in from all directions. Change your diet, sleep facing east, wear your lucky slippers, recite Psalm 40, 6 backwards. If all else failed, there was always the medieval cure-all: more wine. But let's be fair. Sometimes the king just needed time. Nerves fade, crowds disperse, and eventually, privacy returns, if only for a moment. The court moves on, the scribes fudge the records, and history quietly forgets the details. For the king and queen, the ordeal becomes just another absurd episode in a life filled with them. And for the rest of the kingdom, it's just one more story to share in the taverns. Proof that even the most powerful among us can be undone by nerves, a noisy audience, and a badly timed draft. If you're ever embarrassed about an awkward moment, remember, at least you didn't have to perform with the fate of a nation and half your in-laws watching from the foot of the bed. You might imagine that after the royal consummation ceremony, the king and queen would be left alone to bask in privacy and peace. In medieval Europe, you'd be spectacularly wrong. The royal wedding night wasn't just about duty and dynastic drama. It was a 2-act play. And Act 2? That's the after-party. A blur of feasting, toasts, and the kind of gentle mockery only your in-laws can deliver. No sooner has the final curtain, or bed curtain, dropped than the royal couple is summoned, sometimes still rumpled, definitely exhausted, to join the celebration. The hall is blazing with torchlight, packed to the rafters with courtiers whose energy levels defy belief. The tables groan under the weight of roasted meats, gleaming pies, candied fruit, and enough bread to start a small rebellion. The castle's best minstrels are already tuning their lutes, and someone is warming up the bagpipes, whether you like it or not. The feasting begins with a bang. The master of revels signals the start, and platters are whisked from kitchen to high table in a parade of culinary excess. Peacocks with gilded feathers, boars' heads, loaves shaped like crowns. For the king and queen, it's all a bit of a blur, especially when the wine starts flowing. It's tradition to toast the royal couple's success, and nobody wants to be the first to run dry. Each noble tries to outdo the last with their elaborate, pun-filled blessings. "May your bed never creak too loudly," shouts an uncle to general laughter. "May your nights be fruitful and your mornings less crowded," chimes in the bishop, looking very pleased with himself. Meanwhile, the jester is in rare form. Having witnessed the ceremony, or at least the parts he could see between fits of giggles, he roams the hall reciting a bawdy poem about the king's battle with the bedsheets. Every couplet gets a bigger laugh. His Majesty vanquished the pillows, but the bolster put up a fight. The queen's cheeks go pink, the king hides a smirk, and the courtiers revel in the rare chance to tease their rulers without risking exile. And then come the gifts, many of them deeply impractical, all of them symbolic: a silver spoon for the heir to come, a carved wooden rabbit for fertility and speed, an embroidered pillow with a suspiciously detailed scene from the earlier ceremony, already earning a spot in the castle's unofficial museum of awkward memorabilia. The queen accepts each one with the stoic grace of someone who has learned to expect surprises. The king, with the weary grin of a man who knows his relatives, will dine out on these stories for years. The toasting and roasting continue late into the night. There are drinking games. Every time someone mentions heir, you take a sip. There are impromptu songs about the royal union, each more ridiculous than the last. The kitchen staff start sneaking leftovers to the dogs, who join in the celebration with wild enthusiasm. Outside, the villagers light bonfires and mimic the court's merriment with their own rough and ready versions of the royal wedding feast. Somewhere around midnight, the revelry begins to wind down. The minstrels play slower tunes. The last of the cakes disappear. Courtiers begin slipping away to nurse their own exhaustion and their own secrets. The king and queen, finally released from the festivities, retreat to their chambers, the sounds of laughter and music echoing down the long, draughty corridors. As the torches burn low and the great hall empties, the message is clear. In the medieval world, nothing is ever truly private, least of all your wedding night. But at least you're in good company, surrounded by friends, family, and a kingdom determined to celebrate every moment, awkward or not. And as the king and queen drift off to sleep, they do so to the memory of a night where even the punchlines were proof of their success. If you thought the royal honeymoon couldn't get any more public, think again. In the Middle Ages, nothing was left to chance. Not even the evidence. When it came to proving that the royal union had truly, finally been sealed, medieval courts had a flair for documentation that would make even the nosiest mother-in-law blush. Welcome to the world of clothes, sheets, and the world's least romantic souvenirs. Let's start with the bedsheets. In many kingdoms, a fresh white linen was laid out on the bed before the newlyweds ever arrived. The point wasn't comfort. It was proof. After the ceremonial deed, the sheets were carefully inspected by senior ladies of the court, usually women with years of experience, hawk-like vision, and zero hesitation about discussing the details at breakfast. Their mission: to confirm that consummation had indeed taken place, often with all the gravity of a court trial. If the right marks were found, the kingdom could relax. If not, well, expect another round of anxious prayers, awkward explanations, and maybe even a do-over. The inspection didn't end there. In particularly enthusiastic courts, the honored sheet was sometimes displayed for all to see. Imagine stumbling into the great hall the morning after your wedding, only to find your bedding flapping in the breeze from the battlements, while servants point and peasants try to guess what it all means. Some places took things a step further, parading the linen through town, accompanied by musicians, and much less subtle winks. It was the medieval version of a viral Instagram story, except the hashtag was just number heir on the way. Clothing played a role too. The king's nightshirt and the queen's bridal chemise might be collected by servants, folded neatly, and handed to the royal seamstress for safekeeping, never to be worn again, but occasionally hauled out as evidence if the legitimacy of a future prince was ever questioned. "See here," a counselor might exclaim, waving a decades-old sleeve. "These are the garments from that famous night. The dynasty is secure." The court nods solemnly, pretending this is all very normal. Even the pillows could become keepsakes, embroidered with dates, initials, or helpful reminders like "be fruitful." They were treasured as tokens of the big event. Sometimes these tokens were given away as diplomatic gifts. Imagine being the ambassador from Aragon, traveling hundreds of miles, only to be presented with a lacy pillow from the royal nuptials. "For your collection," the king says, as you try not to ask follow-up questions. If you're starting to feel bad for the royal couple, you're not alone. Every detail is up for discussion. At court, everyone's an amateur detective. Did the stains look convincing? Was the fabric really as soft as promised? Did the king's robe end up in the right place, or was it last seen serving as a flag for the kitchen staff's victory parade? Gossip flies faster than the pigeons in the bell tower, and just when you think the spectacle is over, a court painter arrives to capture the scene for posterity, though with enough artistic license to ensure the royal dignity is, at least technically, preserved. Of course, all this collecting and displaying wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about politics. If anyone challenged the legitimacy of the royal heir, these relics became the first line of defense. The king and queen could point to their carefully curated museum of marital memorabilia and say, "See? The deed was done, the evidence displayed, and the kingdom watched every step." So next time you think your wedding photos are embarrassing, spare a thought for the medieval royals whose most intimate moments became souvenirs for the entire country. In a world obsessed with proof, nothing said happily ever after quite like a well-stained sheet, a folded nightshirt, and a keepsake pillow proudly exhibited in the halls of power for all to see. And in the end, these tokens of union were more than awkward souvenirs. They were the bedrock of a dynasty's claim to power, preserved one laundry day at a time. If you ever felt like your own romantic evenings have been sabotaged by poor timing or bad lighting, take comfort. Medieval kings and queens would have killed for your scented candles and central heating. For all the pageantry of a royal wedding, setting the mood for romance in a stone castle was an adventure in its own right. One involving more drafts, more livestock, and far fewer privacy screens than you'd think. First, let's talk temperature. Castles are beautiful on the outside, soaring turrets, imposing walls, the envy of every postcard. On the inside, however, they are about as cozy as a walk-in refrigerator. No matter the season, a medieval castle bedroom is either bone-chillingly cold or, in summer, an oven full of wool and wilted courtiers. Setting the mood often began with a frantic effort to get the fire going in the hearth. If the king was lucky, a servant managed to coax a few embers into life before the festivities. If not, the royal couple could look forward to an evening of icy toes and visible breath, romance, but with chattering teeth. Of course, the windows don't help. Forget double glazing. Most castle windows are little more than holes in the wall, covered with oiled linen, or, if you're truly fancy, thin, wavy glass that does little to stop the howling wind. That gentle, candle-flickered atmosphere you see in movies? In reality, it's more like a flickering battle between gusty air and the persistent scent of old cheese. Speaking of cheese, let's not forget the livestock. Medieval castles are noisy places, and even on your wedding night, you're unlikely to have the place to yourselves. Horses stomp and whinny in the courtyard below. The cows in the byre let out disgruntled moos, dogs bark at shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays as if auditioning for a starring role. Servants, meanwhile, rush in and out, bringing mood enhancers like extra blankets or the occasional roasted turnip, because nothing says passion like root vegetables. Ambiance was a matter of improvisation. Maybe the king tries to set the mood by ordering rose petals scattered on the bed, only for the wind to blow them across the floor and under the wardrobe. Maybe someone attempts a fragrant bundle of herbs, lavender if you're lucky, onions if you're not. Sometimes the scented candle is just a hunk of animal fat burning in a dish, producing a smell somewhere between barnyard and Tuesday stew. If the fire gets going, you now have a smoky haze to add to the romance. Lighting was no easier. Too many candles and the chamber becomes a sauna. Too few, and you're fumbling around in the dark, trying not to trip over your own royal robes. Minstrels might be stationed in the next room, providing a soft lute melody to drown out the wind. Unless, of course, a draught blows out the music too. In some cases, a courtier is assigned to hold a candle at the ready, standing like a human lamppost as you attempt to look dreamy and not freeze. And let's not forget the effect on mood. The queen might have been dreaming of sweet poetry and soft touches, but instead, she's greeted by the combined aroma of sheep, wax, and damp wool. The king's big romantic gesture is keeping the fire lit for more than 5 minutes and not stepping in a puddle. If sparks do fly, it's probably because someone leaned too close to the candle. Yet, somehow, the royal couple does their best. With every draught, every distant whinny, every slapstick attempt at coziness, they manage to find a little warmth and laughter. Medieval romance wasn't about perfection. It was about surviving the elements, the livestock, and the world's nosiest audience, all while trying to look regal in 3 layers of itchy linen. So next time your date night goes sideways, remember, you could be sharing your first kiss with half the kingdom listening, your feet freezing, and a draft horse cheering you on from below. Now that's what you call atmosphere. The royal wedding night may be over, but in the medieval court, the real show is just beginning. The moment the king and queen's chamber door clicks shut, the castle is abuzz with whispers, cackles, and creative retellings. If modern celebrities think they have it bad with the paparazzi, they've never faced a medieval bard with a grudge and a lute. Welcome to the world of royal rumors, where scandal, slander, and the occasional musical roast are just part of the landscape. It starts innocently enough. A servant glimpses the queen's slipper in the corridor at midnight. The next morning, the tale has already grown legs. Did you hear? The queen ran down the hall, pursued by the king, 3 bishops, and possibly a goat. By the time the cooks have weighed in, there's talk of a midnight chase, an overturned candlestick, and at least 1 nobleman hiding in a wardrobe. It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is who tells the story first, and how juicy they can make it. Minstrels are the tabloid columnists of the age. Give them a good yarn, and they'll have a ballad composed by breakfast. Was the king's performance heroic? Or did he trip over his own tunic? Was the sheet displayed too soon? Or was there an extended intermission? Every detail becomes fodder for a song, a sly toast at dinner, or an impromptu shadow puppet show by the younger pages. Some of these tales are good-natured ribbing. Others? Not so much. In the hands of a jealous rival or a disgruntled courtier, a simple misstep becomes a full-blown scandal. Why did the candles go out so early? Did the queen really faint, or was she just tired of waiting? Slander is a medieval art form. Accusations are never direct. They arrive wrapped in flattery and implication. A baroness sighs at breakfast. Of course, not every couple has instant chemistry. A rival prince wonders aloud whether the bed was properly blessed. The royal scribe starts taking very pointed notes about the timing of the next morning's announcements. The gossip is relentless, and no one, not even the king's dog, is immune. And then come the songs. Bards take to the great hall, spinning rhyming couplets about the night's heroics and surprises. Sometimes a whole table joins in, a popular refrain, "May the king's courage match his crown, and the queen's patience never drown." The queen's mother winces, the king pretends to laugh, and the rest of the court gleefully memorizes the tune for the next feast. Outside the castle, the rumors spread even faster. Villagers love nothing more than a royal blunder. A single misplaced slipper or an awkward breakfast can become the stuff of legend, told and retold, with ever more spectacular details. Children act out the drama in muddy courtyards. Tavern keepers invent new drinks with names like the Blushing Bride or Royal Retreat. By week's end, the whole countryside is convinced the king danced the tarantella in his underclothes. Of course, the royal couple can do little but wait for the next big scandal to come along and steal the spotlight. They may try to shrug off the gossip, pretend not to notice the winks and whispers, and hope that next year's wedding will give the bards something new to sing about. So, as the torches gutter out and the laughter dies down, remember, in the medieval world, reputation is never safe. Privacy is an illusion, and if you can't beat the rumors, you might as well dance to the song. You might think you're safe from prying eyes once the ceremony is done. But in the medieval world, the real paparazzi never put down their quills. Forget flashes and camera shutters. Your every move as a royal is immortalized by chroniclers, court artists, and scribes who see themselves less as witnesses and more as the original influencers. These are the people who decide what goes into the official record and what gets added in the margins with a wink. First, let's talk about the chroniclers. These ink-stained historians wander the halls, ears pricked for any hint of drama, always ready to turn a cough into an omen and a yawn into a diplomatic incident. Their job, to document history for posterity, but also, let's be honest, to keep things interesting for the next generation. If the king sneezed on the wedding night, you can be sure it will appear in the royal annals as a mighty gust of virility. If the queen tripped on her nightgown, the chronicler will note a humble act of grace, much admired by the congregation. The court artist, meanwhile, has a slightly trickier job. Before photography, every major moment needs to be painted, sketched, or woven into a tapestry. These artists hover at the edge of the action, brush or needle in hand, ready to capture the royal couple in all their glory, or at least their best angle. But reality and portraiture are rarely the same. If the king looked nervous or the queen rolled her eyes, a few creative adjustments are in order. Suddenly, everyone looks calm, virtuous, and at least 10 years younger. Tapestries show heroic posture, not stage fright. Illuminated manuscripts highlight halos, not hickeys. But let's not forget the scribes. These tireless note-takers are the medieval equivalent of a group chat, but with better handwriting and even more drama. Their records don't just include the official marriage contract or a list of witnesses. They slip in asides about noteworthy sighs, unexpected commotions, and, in one infamous case, the enthusiastic applause of the jester. When disputes arise years later, the court lawyers dig up these records for ammunition. Did the king really faint? Was the sheet displayed on time? Was the royal heir truly conceived on the proper side of the bed? It's all there, in Latin, with marginal doodles. Sometimes, the medieval paparazzi go one step further. They stage little reenactments or draw cartoons in the margins, poking fun at the royal couple's performance, attire, or even the court's reactions. More than one chronicle survives with tiny, secretive caricatures: a king tangled in bedsheets, a bishop shielding his eyes, a jester peeking through the curtains. These sketches are rarely official, but they endure as the best inside jokes of the era. And if you think you can escape their gaze by hiding away for a while, think again. Artists and chroniclers are always one step ahead. If the king and queen retire early, it's described as an early night for fruitful union. If they stay up late, vigorous festivities continued until dawn. The official record always finds a way to make the mundane seem legendary and the embarrassing seem noble. For medieval royalty, the lesson is simple. Someone is always watching and documenting. Your greatest triumphs and your most awkward moments alike are inked, illustrated, and whispered about for generations to come. You may outlive the gossip, but you'll never outlive the chronicles. So, as the candles gutter and the chroniclers slip away to sharpen their quills, rest easy. In the Middle Ages, you were never truly alone. You were just waiting for the next scribe to write you into legend or into the margins, doodles and all. For most medieval kings, the pressure to perform on the wedding night was enough to make even the bravest knight wish for a dragon attack instead. Yet not every monarch was content to play along with the public spectacle. Every now and then, a king rebelled. Not on the battlefield, but right in the bedchamber, where he staged a very different kind of coup. When kings refused to take part in the consummation ceremony, the resulting chaos was legendary. Picture it. The great hall is buzzing, the witnesses are assembled, the bedsheets are crisp, and the bishop's already rehearsed his fertility blessing 3 times. But the king is nowhere to be found. Maybe he's lingering in the chapel, deep in prayer. Maybe he's claimed an upset stomach. Or, if he's particularly creative, he's invented a new royal ritual involving cold feet and a mysterious need for a midnight stroll. Sometimes he just locks the door and refuses to come out until the crowd has dispersed. Suddenly, the royal marriage becomes less a romantic union and more a standoff worthy of the chronicles. For the court, this was a crisis. The legitimacy of the dynasty depended on witnesses, and the witnesses depended on their front row seats. If the king said no, he wasn't just dodging embarrassment, he was throwing the kingdom into a legal and political storm. Courtiers panicked. Advisors scrambled to rewrite the ceremony on the fly. The queen, caught in the middle, tried to look composed while silently calculating how many prayers it would take to get through the night. The reactions varied by personality and politics. Some kings, famous for stubbornness, flatly refused to appear in the ceremonial chamber. Others tried subtler forms of sabotage, scheduling the event for an impossible hour, demanding obscure rituals, or accidentally losing the blessed candle. In one notorious case, a king insisted that the entire event be witnessed only by the royal falconer and a goat, on the grounds that they are the only ones who truly understand me. The bishop was not amused. When persuasion failed, the court shifted to negotiation. Promises were made, sometimes in the form of extra privileges, lucrative lands, or, for one enterprising monarch, the delivery of his favorite imported cheese. The master of ceremonies would plead, the queen's mother would cry, and the clergy would threaten to withhold blessings. Occasionally, the threat of political instability was enough to convince even the most reluctant royal to at least make an appearance, if not a full effort. Of course, not all rebellions ended with compromise. Some kings stood firm, daring anyone to question their authority in the most private of matters. The resulting scandals were pure gold for chroniclers and gossips. Nobles whispered about unconsummated unions and what that meant for future heirs. Foreign ambassadors sent frantic letters home, speculating about the king's health, character, and prospects for future alliances. And somewhere in the background, the royal jester quietly composed a ballad about the night the king took a nap. History remembers these refusals as bold statements or grave mistakes, depending on who tells the story. Sometimes, new traditions emerged, a discreet ceremony with fewer witnesses, or a symbolic act performed behind closed doors and later certified with a stack of signatures and oaths. Other times, the crisis dragged on, leaving the realm in suspense while everyone waited for the king to either change his mind or invent a new excuse. But one thing was certain. When a king refused to go along with the consummation circus, the ripples echoed far beyond the bedroom. In a world where private acts had public consequences, rebellion in the bedchamber was as political and as risky as any war or treaty. So, next time you hear about a royal with cold feet, remember, in medieval Europe, the bravest stand sometimes happened in slippers behind a locked door with a whole kingdom waiting just outside. If you think medieval queens were passive figures, quietly enduring ceremony and pageantry, think again. For every king lost in the spectacle of his own nerves, there was a queen ready to seize the moment. Sometimes with more composure, sometimes with outright cunning. When the spotlight fell on the royal ladies, the wedding night could turn from public ordeal to a subtle exercise in power, strategy, and just a touch of theatrical flair. The royal bride's first night was supposed to be about obedience and tradition, but some queens flipped the script entirely. With a carefully raised eyebrow or a single whispered instruction to her ladies-in-waiting, a queen could shape the evening to her own liking. After all, the eyes of the court were not just on the king's performance, but on her reaction, her composure, her grace, and yes, her apparent satisfaction. Some queens became masters of stagecraft. If the king faltered, she might leap in with a joke to lighten the mood, or distract the audience with a sudden request for a different hymn or more candles. If the bishop was droning on about fertility, the queen's dry comment could turn his sermon into a punchline. These small interventions were more than moments of relief. They were signals to the court that the new queen would not be easily sidelined. A few queens took charge of the entire ritual, orchestrating every detail. In France, one notorious royal consort turned the wedding night into her personal showcase, greeting each witness by name and bestowing a comment or compliment before inviting them to enjoy the proceedings from the best angle. When her husband hesitated, she offered encouragement with a steady hand, making sure that no one in the room doubted her role as a partner, not just a prop. Then there were the queens who used the public nature of the ceremony for strategic ends. With every glance, every word, every carefully chosen reaction, they communicated loyalty, wit, and sometimes just the right amount of mystery. A queen who played the part well could win hearts across the realm and silence critics before they had a chance to sharpen their quills. Her supporters among the nobility would nod in approval, while her rivals might think twice before starting a whisper campaign. And if the situation called for it, a queen could wield her power privately too. Behind the scenes, She could reward helpful witnesses, reward loyal ladies in waiting with gifts or favor, and gently remind the king's advisors that a happy marriage meant a stable kingdom. Many a royal mother-in-law found herself outmaneuvered by a queen with charm and political instincts to match her beauty. Some queens even found a way to have the last laugh. If the evidence sheet was to be displayed, she made sure it was presented with a flourish, perhaps adding a subtle flourish of her own. An embroidered symbol, a scented sprig, a whispered aside to the chief lady of the bedchamber. These gestures became legend, retold in courtly gossip and immortalized in illuminated manuscripts with a wink. Of course, not every queen enjoyed the spectacle. For some, it was an ordeal to endure. For others, an opportunity to shine. But in the grand theatre of medieval royalty, queens had far more agency than they were ever given credit for in the fairy tales. Sometimes, all it took was a well-timed sigh, a perfectly executed curtsy, or a biting quip delivered right under the archbishop's nose. So, while the spotlight might have been fixed on the king, it was often the queen who truly commanded the stage, writing her own lines, winning her own allies, and ensuring that, come morning, the court would remember her not as a passive figure, but as a queen who took charge, with style. In the modern world, the arrival of a baby is a private celebration. Maybe a few phone calls, a text to the family group chat, some photos shared with friends. In medieval Europe, a royal birth was a public spectacle, and the math started before the baby was even out of the cradle. For kings and queens, giving the kingdom an heir meant giving the entire population a new hobby, counting backwards and speculating loudly about what went on 9 months ago. The moment the royal midwife announced a successful birth, the castle erupted in celebration. Church bells rang, minstrels composed songs, and a town crier dashed through the mud to announce the news to anyone within shouting distance. But for the court, the real fun was just beginning. Out came the calendars, the wedding records, and the sharp-eyed noblewomen with memories like iron traps. The calculation was simple and universal. How long had it been since the wedding night? Was the baby born on time? Or did it arrive suspiciously early? Or embarrassingly late? The stakes were high. A perfectly timed heir was proof of a legitimate union, a blessing from God, and a source of pride for the dynasty. But if the dates didn't quite add up, the whispers started. First in the great hall, then in the streets, and finally in every peasant hovel from here to the next kingdom. Every noble in the realm fancied themselves an expert in obstetrics, even if their actual experience ended at raising goats. If my calculations are correct, one baroness would whisper, the child was conceived just after Michaelmas. Remember, there was a full moon that week. Another would chime in, but surely no child could be born so soon unless, and so the gossip spread, gaining speed and detail with every retelling. Was the prince a little too robust? Did the princess open her eyes suspiciously early? Was there a faint hint of the stable master's hair color? Even the official records played their part. Chroniclers dutifully recorded the time and date of the birth, sometimes fudging a day or two in either direction if it helped the story along. Church officials might bless the child with extra fervor if the math looked favorable, or recommend a little extra penance if things seemed off. In some kingdoms, midwives were required to swear oaths before God that the baby was legitimate, just in case anyone wanted to contest the outcome later. For the royal couple, the pressure didn't stop at delivery. The Queen's confinement, the period when she withdrew from public life to await the birth, was itself the subject of endless rumors. Was she looking well? Was her appetite unusual? Did she pray more than usual, or was she seen smiling with a suspicious lack of nausea? The king, meanwhile, was judged on his public composure. Too nervous, and people suspected trouble. Too confident, and they whispered about secret liaisons. If the timing truly went awry, the kingdom braced itself for drama. Accusations could mean anything from exile to annulment, or, in extreme cases, war. But if the dates lined up, all was forgiven. The new prince or princess was paraded through the streets, blessed by every available priest, and promptly set up in a gilded crib under the eyes of a dozen chaperones. So next time you see a royal baby headline, remember, in medieval Europe, a birth announcement was just the beginning. The real tradition was counting backwards, publicly, while everyone, from bishops to bakers, played detective. For kings and queens, it wasn't just about welcoming a child. It was about passing the kingdom's oldest test, the math quiz everyone got to grade. By now, you're probably asking yourself, did any of this actually happen? Or have we wandered so deep into the medieval rumor mill that even the chroniclers can't find their way out? Were royal wedding nights really public events? Did bishops truly bless the bed? And did court ladies actually wave around bedsheets like victory banners? Or is this all just history's version of a game of telephone, where every retelling gets a little weirder and a lot less private? The answer, like most things in medieval history, is yes, but also not quite. The public consummation ceremony is one of those tales that historians love to argue about. In some places, and at certain times, yes, witnesses did observe the newlyweds together, sometimes even leading them to bed and staying just long enough to confirm they were under the same blanket. Court chroniclers and ambassadors wrote detailed, sometimes shocked, accounts of these rituals. There are records from France, England, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire describing bedchambers packed with nobles, clergy, and royal hangers-on, all determined to do their civic duty, while probably wishing they could unsee the whole affair. But as with all things historical, the details are messy. Sometimes witnessing meant seeing the couple in bed together, fully clothed and looking mildly uncomfortable, before leaving them to get on with it. In other times and places, the ritual was more symbolic than voyeuristic. A bishop might bless the couple and the bed. Everyone would wish them a fruitful night, and then politely retreat. The bedsheet inspections, real in some courts, imagined in others, and probably exaggerated in nearly all. Let's face it, nothing says history quite like a little embroidery, a lot of paperwork, and a healthy dose of gossip. What about the audience's size? Not every kingdom went full stadium seating. Some traditions limited attendance to just a handful of senior nobles and close relatives, while others opened the event to half the aristocracy, sometimes more, depending on how many people wanted to feel important. And not all newlyweds were subjected to these rituals. Some managed to negotiate their way out, invent creative excuses, or simply forgot to invite the witnesses until it was too late. Those who could get away with it usually did. Those who couldn't became legends, and not always for the reasons they hoped. And, of course, history's favorite exaggerators, the bards, the satirists, and the scandal-loving chroniclers, made sure every mishap, every rumor, and every "I heard it from a friend who heard it from her cousin's maid" detail was recorded for posterity. By the time modern historians start sifting through the evidence, it's almost impossible to separate fact from fiction. Did the Queen's slipper really go missing at midnight? Was the king serenaded by a choir of monks while he tried to look confident? Did anyone ever actually parade a bedsheet through the market square? Maybe. Sometimes. Somewhere. But if not, someone definitely wrote a song about it. So, did medieval kings have sex in public? Sometimes. Sort of in their own awkward, ceremonial way. Was it universal? Absolutely not. Was it weird, memorable, and just a little bit hilarious every single time. As with most things from the past, the truth is tangled up with the legends. What matters is that people have always loved to watch, to wonder, and to tell stories, sometimes at someone else's expense. And now, as you drift off, let yourself imagine that somewhere, in a candlelit chamber, history's most awkward audience is still waiting for the main event. If you thought medieval Europe had a monopoly on awkward wedding night traditions, think again. Across the globe, cultures throughout history have found creative, and sometimes excruciatingly public, ways to make sure newlyweds really tied the knot. Turns out, royal embarrassment is a universal language. Let's start with medieval France's cousins, the Byzantines. In Constantinople's great palaces, the imperial family took wedding night rituals to theatrical heights. A full parade would escort the newlyweds to the bedchamber, torches blazing and courtiers singing hymns as if the fate of the empire depended on perfect choreography. Senior eunuchs and ladies of the court were appointed as official observers, charged with peeking through curtains and noting every significant sigh. Sometimes, the empress herself would give a pep talk or a warning before retreating behind velvet drapes. In Spain and Portugal, noble couples also faced an audience, though Iberian sensibilities leaned towards symbolic participation. Instead of lingering at the foot of the bed, witnesses would simply lead the couple into the room, say a prayer, and then quietly close the doors. But privacy was never guaranteed. Gossipy servants were expected to listen at keyholes and later provide detailed accounts for the ladies-in-waiting and local bishops. In some regions, evidence was still required, so you could expect your laundry to become very public very quickly. Travel farther east, and you'll find Russia's Orthodox aristocracy had its own blend of ritual and spectacle. Noble marriages began with a ceremonial bath, attended by relatives of course, followed by the official putting to bed, during which family elders and clergy blessed the union with prayers, icons, and, inevitably, an audience. Sheets were inspected here too, and if the bride proved shy, her mother-in-law might offer hands-on encouragement, turning the royal wedding night into a team sport. Meanwhile, in parts of Scandinavia, the rituals could be rowdier still. Norse wedding feasts were infamous for days-long drinking and singing. The happy couple was escorted to their chamber by family and friends, who often refused to leave until they'd witnessed the marriage properly begun, sometimes banging on the walls and shouting helpful tips through the door. And if you think the North was cold, just wait until you hear about the tradition of throwing snowballs at the bedchamber window to wish the couple fertility and good luck. Further afield, some African kingdoms developed unique proof of consummation rituals. In certain royal families, female relatives would examine the bride after the wedding night and publicly announce the results. In some Asian courts, attendants would leave symbolic objects in the bedchamber, pomegranates, fish, or even noisy frogs, to bless the union with prosperity, children, or simply a bit of comic relief. All these customs shared the same goal: to reassure the community that the marriage was real, the lineage secure, and the rumors, mostly, kept in check. Whether it was priests chanting, minstrels serenading, or neighbors banging on the walls, every culture had its way of making sure intimacy came with an audience. And, of course, wherever there were public rituals, there was public gossip. Songs, stories, and scandalous jokes traveled across borders and centuries, evolving with each retelling. What started as a simple blessing or a symbolic gesture soon became the stuff of legend, sometimes more memorable than the marriage itself. So, next time you cringe at the idea of medieval nobles crowding into the king's bedroom, remember, awkward wedding nights are a global phenomenon. The desire to witness, to bless, and to gossip about other people's private business has united humanity for centuries. In the end, whether you're in Paris, Moscow, or a snow-covered Norse village, everyone loves a good story, especially if it ends with the sheets being waved out the window. There comes a point in every long-running medieval spectacle when even the most dedicated witness tires of the show. For the tradition of public royal consummation, that moment crept in slowly, like a draft through a castle hallway, changing not with a bang, but with a steady shuffle of feet, and a collective sigh of relief from kings, queens, and court officials everywhere. By the late Middle Ages, Europe's appetite for public proofs of marriage had begun to wane. Some credit the gradual spread of more refined ideas about privacy and personal dignity, while others point to sheer exhaustion. After centuries of crowded bedchambers and anxious nobles holding their breath in the name of succession, there was a growing consensus that maybe, just maybe, some things were better left unseen. The change didn't happen overnight. At first, only the boldest or most powerful royal couples dared to bend the rules. A French king might gently suggest that perhaps just the senior clergy and a single witness would suffice, rather than the full court. In England, a clever queen's mother might arrange for the key to the bedchamber to be misplaced at the right moment, ensuring the newlyweds at least a little time alone before the chorus of congratulations began. Some royal couples staged symbolic rituals, allowing a select few to see them tucked in before politely, or not so politely, asking everyone to leave. Chroniclers of the time, always ready with a quill and a quip, recorded these changes with a mixture of suspicion and relief. The king, wishing for peace, wrote one English scribe, did command the curtains drawn and the doors secured, leaving the courtiers to drink in the hall and compose their songs elsewhere. In Spain, a bishop remarked that, while he preferred tradition, it was not necessary to observe every sigh and shuffle. The public was left to speculate, but the evidence, literal and figurative, was increasingly kept private. Why the shift? Partly, it was political. As kingdoms grew larger and courts more sophisticated, the need for ironclad public proof of consummation lessened. Record-keeping improved. So did diplomatic relationships. Treaties and marriages could be notarized, witnessed, and certified with much less bedsheet waving. Science and medicine inched forward, making childbirth more predictable, if no less risky, and giving rulers more confidence in their own authority. The spread of Renaissance ideals, personal honor, inner virtue, and the sanctity of marriage also helped dim the torchlight on these very public rituals. And of course, changing tastes played a role. The new generation of courtiers, raised on tales of knightly romance and poetic love, found the whole business of bedchamber witnessing increasingly awkward. The etiquette books filling castle libraries quietly dropped the old instructions, and fashionable young nobles learned to feign shock at stories their own grandparents had participated in. Within a few generations, the tradition faded almost entirely. By the early modern period, consummation ceremonies were the stuff of jokes, anecdotes, and scandalous plays. "Did you hear about the Queen's mother?" whispered one duchess. "She actually tried to keep a bedsheet as a souvenir." The practice lingered, only in the imagination, and in the occasional gossipy chronicle, until, eventually, the very idea of witnessing a royal wedding night became absurd. For kings and queens, it was a welcome change. No more bedsheet parades. No more anxious witnesses crowding around the four-poster. Privacy, once a rare luxury, became a birthright. At least for the royals. For everyone else, the closing of the curtains was both an end and a beginning, the dawn of a world where love and legitimacy could flourish, not in the eyes of the crowd, but in the quiet, candlelit corners where it belonged. So, as history turned its gaze elsewhere, the court finally dimmed the lights, closed the curtains, and left the newlyweds in peace, for real this time. As the centuries rolled on and the castle doors finally closed, the memory of public royal consummation faded, but it never truly vanished. Like all great stories, it lingered in the halls of history, growing a little taller, a little stranger, and infinitely more entertaining with each retelling. In the modern imagination, medieval romance is less about candlelit walks and stolen glances, and more about group projects in the world's coldest bedrooms. So why do these tales of awkwardness still captivate us? For one thing, they offer irresistible proof that even the most powerful people in history had to endure the world's worst icebreakers. The idea that kings, queens, bishops, and half the nobility might gather to ensure everything went smoothly is so fantastically human that it bridges the gap between then and now. We might have smartphones and private honeymoons, but nobody's immune to the fear of embarrassing themselves in front of an audience, medieval or otherwise. These stories also remind us that power and privacy haven't always gone hand in hand. Today, we expect our leaders to have boundaries. But for most of history, a royal's private life was a public event. Legitimacy was currency, and everyone had a stake in how the next generation arrived. The ritual of public consummation may seem alien, but at its core, it was about collective anxiety. In a world without paternity tests, the best insurance policy was an audience, preferably a sober one. But let's not get picky. As time passed, the memory of these rituals turned from necessity to novelty. Court chroniclers wrote about the old customs with a mixture of fondness and second-hand embarrassment. Playwrights lampooned them on stage. Poets slipped sly references into their sonnets. Even today, historical fiction and film love a good, blushing wedding night scene, with courtly voyeurs peering through velvet curtains, everyone desperate for a peek, and nobody quite knowing where to look. The joke, it turns out, is timeless. But there's a softer side to this legacy too. Behind the awkwardness and the spectacle was a genuine desire to belong, to be recognized, and to leave a mark. The royal bedchamber, as ridiculous as it might seem, was a stage for the hopes and anxieties of an entire people. Dynasties rose and fell on the outcome of a single night, and every witness carried away a piece of history, real or imagined, embroidered or sung, whispered in the dark or splashed in brilliant color across the pages of a family chronicle. What survives now are echoes. A faded tapestry here, a joke in a bard's old tune there, an anecdote handed down at family gatherings. They remind us that love and legitimacy have always tangled together in complicated ways, and that, sometimes, survival meant playing along with the world's strangest traditions. We remember these moments not just because they're funny, but because they make the past feel close, familiar, and deeply human. So, as you settle into your own mercifully private bed, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come and how much we have in common with those who came before. Maybe royal romance really was awkward. Maybe it was embarrassing, even terrifying. But it was also hopeful, stubborn, and kind of wonderful. In the end, history's most enduring legacy isn't found in grand battles or towering monuments, but in the small, vulnerable moments when we try, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, to connect. And that's something worth remembering, tonight and every night, as you drift gently off to sleep. If you think the royal bed was all silk sheets and soft pillows, think again. For a medieval king and queen, the royal bed was less a love nest and more a statement piece, a cross between a fortress, a display case, and a very squeaky stage. By the time the marriage ceremony was over and the couple was led to their private chamber, what awaited them was nothing like the cozy beds you know today. Let's start with the size. Medieval royal beds were enormous. Part of this was symbolism. Nothing says power like a piece of furniture you could park a horse on. But there was a practical reason too. These beds often had to accommodate more than just two people. On most nights, the royal bed was a multi-purpose platform shared with royal children, ladies in waiting, favorite dogs, and, on special occasions, enough witnesses to fill a modest theatre. The result? A mattress wide enough to need its own postal code and sturdy enough to survive generations of ceremonial use. And then there were the posts, tall, carved, and crowned with elaborate canopies. These four-poster masterpieces were meant to impress, and sometimes intimidate. Heavy curtains could be drawn for privacy, or at least the appearance of it, but in truth, they were mostly for show. They did little to block out the chill, the noise, or the suspiciously draughty air. In the depths of winter, sleeping in the royal bed was less about romance and more about not freezing. That's why most royal couples huddled together under layers of wool, fur, and sometimes even leather, while the bed's giant canopy sagged above, holding back a winter's worth of dust. As for comfort, well, let's just say medieval royalty had different standards. Feather beds existed, but only for the truly elite. More often, the mattress was stuffed with straw, feathers, or a lumpy mix of whatever could be gathered from the local barnyard. After a few years, or a few royal children, the mattress developed soft spots, hard lumps, and a personality all its own. You never quite knew whether you'd wake up refreshed or feeling like you'd lost a wrestling match with a bale of hay. Of course, the royal bed wasn't just for sleeping. It was a stage for ceremony, public and private. On wedding nights, it became the centerpiece of the consummation ritual, a piece of furniture with its own audience and a starring role in court gossip. The creaking of its wooden frame was a sound every noble recognized and commented on the next day. During illnesses, it doubled as a royal sickbed, with priests and doctors crowding around. At important moments, it was the place for receiving foreign dignitaries, signing treaties, and, occasionally, holding impromptu council meetings in dressing gowns. Then there was the question of cleaning. Changing the linens on a royal bed was a group project, requiring servants with strong arms and stronger stomachs. The sheets were rarely white for long, and the task of shaking out the mattress often revealed lost jewelry, wayward pets, or a stash of secret notes left by bored courtiers. In the end, the royal bed was everything at once. A symbol of power, a communal gathering spot, a chilly platform for romance, and, above all, a monument to medieval multitasking. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was always memorable. So tonight, as you settle into your own quiet corner, be grateful for your soft mattress, your silent room, and your freedom from an audience. The royal bed may have looked impressive, but trust me, yours is infinitely more restful. If you thought the royal wedding night was the height of awkwardness, brace yourself for what comes next. The morning after. In the world of medieval royalty, privacy didn't magically return with the sunrise. No, the very people who bore witness to your most personal moment were now waiting to share breakfast, exchange knowing looks, and dissect every detail over porridge and bread. The day begins early. The castle is already buzzing as servants scurry down cold corridors, setting out trenchers and filling goblets with weak wine. Nobles gather in the great hall, their hair still mussed from an uncomfortable night on thin feather mattresses. Some look bleary-eyed from celebration. Others are simply eager for gossip. The bishop is there, smiling beatifically, and the royal scribe has his quill ready, because nothing in a royal household is ever left off the record. You and your new spouse emerge from your chamber, hoping for a moment of peace. No such luck. The moment you enter the hall, conversations hush, and all eyes swivel your way. It's not every day the court gets to see the kingdom's future walking around in last night's wedding finery, with only a few new wrinkles and a shared look of exhaustion. The breakfast spread is impressive. Platters of salted fish, dense bread, soft cheese, and, for good measure, a bowl of dried fruit someone insists is a delicacy. The meal would almost be pleasant if not for the company. Your witnesses, now suddenly your dining companions, greet you with far too much enthusiasm. The master of revels launches into a toast, congratulating the royal couple on their union and making 3 separate references to fruitfulness. The bishop offers a prayer so full of winks and innuendo that even the minstrels blush. Then comes the parade of well-meaning advisors, uncles and aunts, each eager to share their wisdom about marriage and child-rearing. Some offer advice on how to ensure a royal heir. Others hand over tokens for luck, herbal sachets, embroidered napkins, or, in one memorable case, a hand-carved rattle for future use. Your spouse gamely thanks everyone, while you work desperately to keep the smile from slipping off your face. The real entertainment, though, is the whispered commentary that swirls around the hall. Did you hear the king snored like a warhorse? Someone murmurs behind a napkin. I saw the queen's slipper under the bed. Must be a good sign, whispers another. The morning becomes a contest of innuendo, each noble determined to outdo the others in subtlety or outright boldness. The jester, never one to let an opportunity slip by, performs a dramatic reenactment of the night's events using 2 bread rolls and a gravy boat. Laughter ripples through the hall, and even the bishop can't resist a chuckle. You try to eat, but the scrutiny is relentless. Every yawn is interpreted as a sign of passion or exhaustion depending on who's telling the story. Every glance between you and your spouse is analyzed for hints of affection, satisfaction, or future drama. Even the way you butter your bread becomes a matter for speculation. Eventually, the meal winds down, and the guests drift away, their curiosity temporarily sated. The scribe quietly updates the family chronicle, making sure the morning's events are recorded for future generations. You and your spouse finally escape to a quieter corner of the castle, grateful for a brief reprieve. As you sip your morning drink and look out over the misty fields, you realize something important. In the world of medieval royalty, the wedding night is just the beginning. The real challenge is surviving the morning after, preferably with your dignity and your appetite intact. When you picture romance, maybe you imagine a candlelit room, the air perfumed with soft vanilla, lavender, or a hint of something exotic. For medieval royals, the reality was different. The scented candle, such as it was, couldn't compete with modern aromatherapy. But that didn't stop kings and queens from trying to set the mood with whatever was on hand. The results were sometimes memorable, occasionally disastrous, and always the stuff of legend. First, let's talk ingredients. Medieval candles were usually made from tallow, which is just a fancy word for animal fat. Imagine lighting a dozen of those around your bed and breathing deeply. The result was less romantic spa and more roast beef buffet meets sheep shearing contest. The truly lucky few might have beeswax candles, which burned cleaner, but these were reserved for the highest nobility and the grandest occasions. Even then, the scent was faint, easily drowned out by the aromas of a crowded castle. Enter the royal attempt at fragrance. Want to impress your queen? Toss a handful of dried herbs, maybe rosemary, thyme, or a precious sprig of imported lavender, into the melting tallow before it hardens. Some ambitious courtiers tried to infuse candles with rose petals or orange peel, but results varied. Often, the scented candle turned into a confusing bouquet of burning hay, bitter citrus, and the persistent undertone of barnyard. If you're getting hungry, don't. It's not that kind of candle. Of course, there were other options for masking unpleasant smells. Incense, for example, was prized and occasionally imported at great expense. The church used frankincense and myrrh for major ceremonies, and some clever chamberlain always managed to squirrel away a little for royal wedding nights. When burned, these resins created a thick, heady smoke that did a better job hiding reality than transforming it. The air filled with the scent of ancient rituals and singed curtains, and occasionally triggered a coughing fit that threatened to derail the entire ceremony. The law of unintended consequences always hovered close. A room filled with tallow, candles, and incense was not a recipe for romance, but for sensory overload. The king might find his eyes watering as he tried to appear confident, while the queen discreetly dabbed at her nose, blaming the joyful occasion for her streaming tears. In especially smoky chambers, even the witnesses began to fade, retreating behind curtains and tapestries just to breathe. Sometimes, the aromatherapy backfired in spectacular ways. On one infamous night in Burgundy, a heavy-handed mix of sage, garlic, and animal fat resulted in a stench so powerful that the royal physician declared the room unfit for living things. The ceremony moved to another chamber, and the original bedchamber was abandoned to the dogs for a week until the smell faded. The dogs, reportedly, were not impressed. Still, everyone kept trying. A good scent was associated with purity, health, and fortune. So the right candle, no matter how faint, was worth the risk. And every now and then, a clever servant would hit on just the right combination of beeswax, herbs, and luck, earning a rare compliment from the queen and a grateful smile from the king. So as you drift off tonight, spare a thought for the royal newlyweds whose romantic hopes rode on the wisps of medieval fragrance. No matter how your own home smells, vanilla, pine, or last night's pizza, it's probably a step up from burning beef, fat, and panic. And if you ever light a candle to set the mood, remember, things could always be worse. At least you don't need to air out your bedroom with a team of dogs and a medieval apology. Every era has its own idea of mood music. Today, you can dim the lights and cue up a playlist to set the perfect romantic tone. In medieval times, royalty didn't have Spotify, but that never stopped anyone from trying to engineer the right musical ambiance for a royal wedding night. The results? As varied as the king's taste, and just as unpredictable. Let's start with the minstrels. A true royal celebration always included music, and the best minstrels in the land were summoned for the occasion. Picture them. Tunics freshly pressed, lutes and harps in hand, nervously waiting outside the bedchamber door for the cue to begin. The idea was that soft melodies would relax the newlyweds and set a harmonious mood, ideally smoothing over the awkwardness of the assembled audience. Some minstrels composed original verses just for the night, crooning rhymes about love, virtue, and fertility, while trying to avoid eye contact with anyone holding a candle. Of course, not every royal couple was soothed by gentle lute music. Some kings preferred something a bit more energetic, maybe a jaunty pipe tune or a marching drum, just to keep things lively. In Scotland, rumour had it that bagpipers were sometimes employed for inspiration, a tradition that raised more eyebrows than heart rates. Nothing says romance quite like a drone of bagpipes echoing off cold stone walls, while the Queen valiantly pretends not to notice. Religious music was also a staple. Bishops and priests often led choirs in hymns to bless the union. These sacred tunes lent a sense of solemnity to the night, but also sometimes doubled as an unintentional lullaby for any noble who'd had a bit too much mead. Let all mortal flesh keep silence has never been quite so literal as when sung by a chorus of monks who would really, really like to be anywhere else. Sometimes, the musical entertainment veered off script. A particularly creative jester might try a comic serenade, poking fun at the king's nerves or the queen's elaborate hair. In one famous case, a minstrel composed a mock-epic ballad about the royal bedsheet, complete with audience participation. The courtiers roared with laughter. The newlyweds, less so, but the jest had its intended effect. breaking the tension just long enough for everyone to relax. The playlist didn't always stop at the door, either. Some traditions called for music to continue outside the chamber as the couple got settled. Witnesses and musicians would wait nearby, listening for any sounds that indicated the union was off to a strong start, or, at the very least, hadn't ended in disaster. If things went suspiciously quiet, a harpist might pluck a few encouraging notes, as if to remind the royal couple that the whole court was still rooting for them. Then there were the accidental performances. Castles are echo chambers. So, every creak of a lute, every slip of a drumstick, and every enthusiastic verse travelled farther than intended. It wasn't unusual for the melody to be punctuated by the squawk of a goose from the courtyard or the clatter of kitchen pots. In one infamous tale, a misfiring bagpipe set off the castle dogs, resulting in a cacophony that had nothing to do with romance, or with music, for that matter. Through it all, music remained a comforting, if sometimes chaotic, presence. Whether the night ended in perfect harmony or comic discord, the medieval bedroom playlist was a reminder that even the grandest occasions benefit from a little background noise. So, as you drift off tonight, let the echoes of lutes, hymns, and distant bagpipes lull you to sleep, safe in the knowledge that your own playlist is just a click away and your audience is mercifully absent. With all eyes on the royal bedchamber and a kingdom's future at stake, it's no surprise that medieval kings and queens sometimes faced a little stage fright. Performance anxiety isn't new, but few jobs in history have come with so many witnesses, so much pressure, and such high stakes. Naturally, a whole cottage industry sprang up to help the royal couple succeed, involving remedies, rituals, and the kind of medicine that makes you grateful for modern science. First, the home remedies. Forget modern pharmaceuticals. Medieval solutions were all about herbs, hope, and a willingness to drink something truly awful if it promised results. A nervous king might be handed a goblet of spiced wine, heavily dosed with cinnamon, ginger, or even a dash of ground antler. The theory was simple. If it's rare, hard to swallow, and tastes like boiled curiosity, it must be good for virility. Some doctors prescribed roasted onions, garlic, or, believe it or not, sparrow brains, all believed to encourage stamina and manly heat. If it failed, at least nobody could accuse you of not trying. For queens, the focus was on fertility. Herbal teas, baths in rose petals, and amulets stitched into nightgowns were all par for the course. Ladies-in-waiting dispensed ancient recipes and cheerful, if dubious, advice. Sleep with your head facing north. Avoid cold drafts. Eat plenty of honey, and never let a black cat cross your path on the way to the bedchamber. If all else failed, a wise woman might prescribe a love potion that doubled as a mild sedative, helpful for calming nerves, if not for producing an heir. Superstitions thrived in this anxious environment. The alignment of the stars was carefully consulted. An unlucky conjunction could prompt a postponement, much to everyone's relief, except the astrologer, who was suddenly very popular. Certain days were believed to be more auspicious than others. No marital duties on Fridays, saints' days, or during Lent, lest the heavens frown on the union. The right socks, a special ribbon, or a piece of iron under the mattress could all mean the difference between a royal triumph and a morning full of awkward glances. The clergy got involved too. Priests offered special blessings, prayers, and sometimes relics for luck. A splinter of saintly bone under the pillow, perhaps, or holy water sprinkled with extra enthusiasm. The bishop might lead a prayer right outside the chamber, asking for divine assistance in fruitful endeavors, while trying very hard not to picture the details. The line between faith and folklore blurred, as every hopeful gesture was enlisted in the cause. And then there were the professionals. Medieval physicians would diagnose a patient's humours, hot, cold, wet, dry, and recommend a balancing act. A king with cold humours might be encouraged to wear extra layers, drink mulled wine, or even sleep beside a hot brick. If the diagnosis was truly dire, leeches, cupping, and other enthusiastic therapies awaited. Nothing gets you in the mood quite like someone suggesting a quick round of bloodletting to clear the mind. Did any of it work? Sometimes. Most of the time, it just gave everyone something to talk about if things went sideways. But in a world without privacy, everyone was invested in royal success. So every remedy, superstition, and medical marvel got its day. So, as you drift off tonight, be grateful for your peace, your privacy, and your freedom from medieval remedies. If performance anxiety ever strikes, you can skip the sparrow brains and simply switch off the lights. History may be weird, but at least now it's mercifully less hands-on. So tonight, as you nestle down in your perfectly private, witness-free bed, take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come since the golden age of royal awkwardness. No bishops hovering in the shadows, no bedsheets paraded through the streets at sunrise. Just you, a soft pillow, and the sweet, blessed silence of a bedroom door that actually latches. It's easy to laugh at the spectacle of medieval kings, forced to prove their prowess while half the kingdom peeked through the curtains. The anxiety, the spectacle, the court chroniclers scribbling notes from the foot of the bed. But beneath all that ceremony was a deep-rooted human need, to belong, to be remembered, to ensure the story continued. No matter how bizarre the script might be, every awkward performance was about more than dynasty or drama. It was survival, legacy, and hope for another generation. So as you drift off, be grateful for the gentle, anonymous peace of modern romance. No public announcements, no official scorekeeping, no need to consult the local clergy before turning off the lights. Our ancestors endured drafty castles, gossipy courtiers, and more than a few unexpected musical numbers, all so you could have a quiet night, safe in your own chosen company. Maybe, as you let yourself slip into dreams, send a little sympathy to those medieval royals, masters of none, actors in a play they never auditioned for, just trying to make it through the night with their dignity and their lineage intact. History might be embarrassing, it might be gross, and it's almost always ridiculous. But it's also proof that humans are stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly inventive in the face of every absurdity. And that's something worth smiling about, even as you drift, gently, quietly, blissfully, to sleep. Good night.